Hi everyone, my name is Dee and this is my channel called The Needle Woman, which I guess I could call my adventures in machine knitting, because machine knitting is something I've only picked up recently, so I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert and that I know all the answers to all the questions. This is just going to be basically me working out how to knit different things on the knitting machine, and this little video is going to be about lace knitting. So how do you actually knit lace on a Brother punchcard model knitting machine? Well, you have something called a lace carriage. Now, lace carriage is a very simple carriage. It only has one button and it flicks between two settings, N and F. Now, N is for normal lace and F is for fine lace. And most of the time you will have it on the N for normal lace. And then you have still your main carriage, and that's the one that has the wool threaded in it, and that's the one that you'll actually knit with. Now, for those of you who have watched my previous videos, you know that I have talked about using my Brother KH860 motor to have it attached to this carriage and basically knitting automatically, just setting how many rows I wanted to knit and then just letting the machine do its thing, and I can just sit back, relax and just watch it. So I tried to work out if I can do that for the lace knitting. Now the problem with that is that you have two carriages to begin with, and I thought, well, okay, which carriage do I attach it to? Do I just leave it onto, the main knitting carriage, or do I maybe change it to the lace carriage? Because you can see that the handle is pretty much the same, so I could just take this handle off possibly and attach that metal plate and then have it attached to the lace carriage. But I gave up on that idea because I will explain how the lace carriage actually works. So with the lace knitting, what you have to do is with the lace carriage, you transfer and manipulate the stitches and select the actual needles, and then with your knit carriage you knit after you've done all the sort of transferring and stuff like that. Now the way that the lace carriage transfers the stitches is apparently by bending the actual needles, which makes it a little bit hard to move sometimes, and so having the actual motor attached to the lace carriage wouldn't work because it would get jammed and it would disconnect. And then having the motor just connected still to the main carriage, that could possibly work, but literally you only need 2 rows at a time, and I think I can just do that manually because again, it could jam and it would just disconnect, and then I would just have to finish knitting it manually anyways, so might as well just leave it and be manual. And the other way you can do lace is kind of a manual way, which is by using these transfer tools. Now, I am not very fond of them because if you don't have a lace carriage, you have to use these because you're going to be transferring and manipulating the stitches to form like a knit two together and things like that. But I actually knit by hand, and to be honest, I would much rather knit lace by hand than use these tools, because you'd have to sort of do all your transfers in that one row and then knit, and if your sample is really big, that's a lot of transferring that you have to do manually. So lace carriage is the way to go. And now I'm going to show you how it actually works. So we started with the punch card in the locked position, and that is this toggle here being next to this red circle number 1. And what that means is that the punch card will not move whether the lace carriage or the knit carriage go past. You still can move it with this dial up and down if you have to, if you're not on the row for some reason, but it will not move automatically. Now, the other thing to mention is that with the Brother punch cards, and other models are different, what you're actually knitting is not what you see. You are actually knitting 7 rows below, which is this row here. So that's just something to keep in mind, okay? So we'll go back up to row number 1. starting line, and even though we're knitting what's actually 7 rows below, we still follow the instructions, especially for lace knitting, the actual instructions that we can see on the punch card. So the first set of instructions is not marked on it, but it is the first step that you have to do, and that is to get your lace carriage from left to right. So we grab the lace carriage, and we just have to make sure, okay, see how that's not engaging this drive belt at the back? We just have to make sure that it does. Okay, so it's clicked in, so it should move now. And we'll go across, and what it has done is it has selected the needles. So now we have to unlock the punch card, and we place it into this green triangle setting marked number 4. Now that is for most of your knitting with your punch card, is that you're going to use that setting. The other one, the elongated triangle, is more for like your motif knitting. So if you're doing a motif in 2 colors, you can actually make the actual motif sort of elongated and twice the length. But I think the way that works is that it repeats the same row of the punch card, so it just knits it twice. So that cannot work with lace, and it says in the manual to never use that for lace knitting, because basically what you're doing with the lace knitting is you're manipulating the stitches, so you're transferring the stitches, and that means you can't do the same row twice, because you can't transfer stitches again from empty needles, because you've already done it, so you can't do the same row twice. So that is why that setting is not to be used for lace. So now we are on the correct setting, and our first set of instructions here is, so you can see these arrows here. We have the red arrow going to the left, so the red arrows are for your lace carriage, and the blue sort of like a U-turn arrow is for your main carriage, for the carriage that you're actually knitting with. So what we're doing now is going lace carriage to the left, and now it should actually transfer stitches for us. Okay, let's have a closer look. So yeah, it has done that. So it has transferred stitches, every second stitch, 1 stitch to the left, and we can see that we have some empty needles. And then go back to the instructions here. So now our set of instructions has 2 things on it. We have a red arrow going right, and we have the blue U-turn arrow. So when you have both of those, what you do first is the blue arrow, so the U-turn. So we grab our knit carriage. Sorry, I keep calling it the knit carriage. It's our main carriage. And we go over, and what we have done now is, if we can see a close up, we have knitted those stitches together, and the empty needles now have yarn in them. So this is basically what he has done, is yarn over, knit 2 together. And then we grab our carriage and we go back. And now we just have a single stitch on each of our needle. So basically what this has done is what you do with manual lace knitting. You do 1 row where you have an actual pattern, and then you do 1 row where it's just plain stitches and like no pattern, and that's generally a row where you do purling. And then if we go back to our instructions here, now one thing I haven't mentioned is that the knitting carriage, the main carriage, doesn't actually engage the drive belt, and the reason for that is that we haven't actually done all the instructions for this particular line, so we don't want the pattern, the punch card, to advance because we haven't done it all. So now we still have to do the red arrow to the right. So we go and grab our lace carriage, and we go right. And now if we have a closer look, the lace carriage hasn't actually done anything. And sometimes that is what the lace carriage does, is it's absolutely nothing. What it does is it just moves across to get itself into position to do the next set of instructions. So if we go back here and have a look, we now have lace carriage going to the left, right, and then left again. So if you look at that line there, and I know I said we are not actually knitting the line that we can see, we're knitting the one that's 7 rows below. I've noticed what happens is when you've got the holes in the punch card, that is when it actually selects the needles. So what it should do now is select as it goes to the left. Okay, so we've done that. We just selected the needles, and now we're going back, and this is a little bit hard to do with one hand, but it has now transferred stitches, and it has gone from left to right and left some empty needles. And so now we've got to go back again with our lace carriage, and it has again done absolutely nothing, just because we have to move it out of the way, because now we have to go back here and we have the blue U-turn arrow, which means we have to use our knit carriage. And so we go knit across, and again yarn over, knit 2 together type of thing, and then just knit back, and we have a single stitch on each of our needles. Another thing to mention when talking about lace knitting are the L-point cams. Now these come in different sizes. There's bigger ones and smaller ones, and if we look closer, they have symbols on them. So on one side we have this, what I call it, like the little bow tie, and on the other side we have a number. This one's got a number 8, and the smaller one has the same bow tie and then a number 4 on the other side. So what that means is that is the number of needles that it is going to affect. Now, what the cams do is they block off a certain section where you place them, and so instead of knitting the lace pattern, you will end up just knitting plain stockinette stitch. And the way that they work is, if we go over across here to the needle bed, so what you have to do is you have to locate, if you can see on the back of the needle bed, you have the same little bow tie all along the back of it. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to line up the cams. They just sort of slot in like that, and you line up the little bow ties. And then when you are knitting, it is actually going to block off that little section there. Now the little bow ties, they are helpful because if we look here, if we get the whole shot of the needle bed, we have 0 here, and then if we look at where the little bow ties are, so that is needle number 13, which is the start of the next set of pattern, and then on this side it is needle number 12. So that here is just one pattern repeat, so that way you know when you place your cams what part of the pattern they're actually going to affect. And I will show you then what happens when you knit. So we are now in a row where we have to use the lace carriage, and if I just grab the lace carriage and bring it over, you can see that it hasn't selected the needles in this section. And I've done a few rows of that. You can see that all we've got here is plain stockinette stitch. So the cams only affect the section where you place them, not the whole pattern, as in like not the whole repeat. So you're not going to block off that same section in the next pattern repeat, if that makes sense. If you want to do that, you actually have to place another cam again in the same position and line it up with a little bow tie or the other way around, and then it will block off the same section in the next pattern repeat. Now you can also add multiple ones and block off more stitches, and you don't even have to place them to line them up with the bow tie. It really depends on what you want to do and which section of the pattern you want to block off. So if we go back here to the book, and I'll show you, this is an example. This is what the pattern should actually look like. And then when we come down here, you can see different placements of the cam, and you can see that there's multiple ones. So they're blocking off a certain section of the pattern, and it's just knitting plain stitches. And then in this section here, same thing, they're sort of combining a smaller one with a bigger one, and again they're all placed in the same spot in the pattern repeat, and then it changes the pattern. And then another example here, and then this is the example. It's a little bit harder to see in the green, but this is where the cam is not placed lined up with a little bow tie up here, and it's blocking off a different section of the pattern, and that's the cams. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video are the actual punch cards themselves. Now this is the basic set that came with the KH860, and you can see sort of there's like different types of punch cards. Now I do have a whole lot more of them, but I don't really know what they do yet. I'm just kind of slowly going through all of the stuff that I acquired. But the basic ones are actually in the manual, and you can see that some of them can do more than one type of knitting. So some you can use for tuck stitch as well as fair isle and even weaving, but the lace ones are kind of a standalone, and they can only do lace knitting. So they can do both lace pattern, which refers to just normal lace, or they can do the fine lace pattern, and that's that switch on the lace carriage that you can change. But there is one pattern which actually does something different, and I'll show you. So in this pattern you can actually combine both normal and fine lace knitting, and there's an extra arrow here that's sort of new, we haven't seen before. Now the thing is, you can actually choose which one is going to be which. So one of these will be your normal and one will be fine, and in the book, if I can flip to that section in the manual, so here we've got the example of the combined fine and normal lace knitting, and in this one here you can see that the regular arrow that we're used to so far is treated as the normal, and then the new arrow is treated as the fine. And then in this example here, it's the opposite. So you kind of get a different effect depending how you read the pattern, how you want to change between the two switches. And I'll show you here also. This little swatch here is the sample of all the patterns that I do have that I sort of tried. So this is the one that I was showing you now, and this is that combined normal and fine lace knitting, and it's a little bit hard to see, but that's the sort of normal, and then that's the fine lace knitting, and that is all of the samples. So hopefully I will be making more videos, and until then, stay tuned.